Welcome to Dynamics CRM 2011 Install and Customize series. This is segment 5, Customizing Attributes. Hello, I'm Stephen No. I'm a consultant and senior trainer specializing in Dynamics CRM solutions. I've been working with Dynamics CRM since version 3 was announced back in 2005. I'll be your guide for this segment. On our agenda, we're going to start off with an introduction to CRM 2011 attributes. We're also going to discuss some design choices, creating new versus customizing existing attributes. We'll also go through an overview of each attribute type, followed by a detailed review of each one. We'll spend some time talking about global option sets or pick lists, and then wrap up with resources. The purpose of this segment is to make sure that, first of all, you understand limitations imposed by SQL on CRM attributes. I want to be able to help you make appropriate create new versus repurpose decisions. And make sure that you understand the individual attribute types, properties, and what can be changed. And finally, to be able to create a global option set and use it amongst multiple attributes. Customizing attributes in CRM 2011. Let's start off with an overview of attributes and customization. As we've discussed earlier, attributes are the data elements in CRM entities, typically known as fields on a form or columns in a table, but within the CRM schema, we refer to them as attributes. We have the ability to change many of the existing out-of-box attribute display names, but you can't delete customizable or system attributes. For that matter, you cannot delete attributes that are part of a managed solution that you've installed on your system. We can also create custom attributes to store information. And once we've created a custom attribute, we do have the ability to delete that attribute as long as it's not part of some managed solution that we've installed on our system. Once an attribute is created, you can't change the schema name. You can't change the data type. You can change the display name, and you can change some other minor properties. Now, all of this is subject to managed solution constraints, and we'll cover that in the solutions segment. Before we get too far into customizing attributes, let's talk about the basics. We want to take a look at what the SQL impact is on the CRM 2011 attributes. Since CRM sits on top of a SQL 2008 64-bit database, that means that we are restricted by SQL 2008 rules. CRM entities are actually stored in two different tables in SQL. The entity name base file and the entity name extension base file. The entity name base file contains all of the attributes created by CRM. This would include anything that comes from Microsoft as far as a base solution or system solution. On the other hand, the entity name extension base file is where CRM creates any custom attributes that we add to either our custom entities or our customizable entities. Now, we are subject to the SQL limitations. So, for instance, the field types that we have to match up to some form of SQL field type. Also, the maximum number of fields per table in SQL is 1,024. So this means, because of the structure up above, the maximum number of custom attributes that we can add to any entity is 1,023. 1,024 less the GUID that defines the record. Also, the maximum row size is 8060 bytes. And this excludes multiple lines of text attribute type, which is stored in a different way. So now let's take a look at the SQL view of a CRM database. I wanted to take a minute or two just to familiarize you with what happens in the SQL database underneath the covers. Now remember, you're not supposed to go in and directly alter the database yourself unless you really know what you're doing, because it's absolutely unsupported as far as Microsoft is concerned. However, what I wanted to do was just to let you take a look real quickly to understand what the structure is that's created underneath. So at this point, take a look at the files in the database of account base and account extension base. Account base contains all of the out-of-box attributes that are part of the account entity. And so if we scroll through here, you'll see there's a lot of fields in place. Some of them are foreign keys, and so on. And this represents all the data elements that are included out of the box with the account entity. The account extension base entity, on the other hand, only has a single column, which is the account ID. This is because this is an unmodified organization, nor have we created any custom attributes. Therefore, in the account extension base, the single field, the account ID, is in place, but there's nothing else there. It's just waiting for us to add new attributes to CRM. New versus repurposing existing fields in CRM. It's very easy to go change a field within CRM, but you want to consider a couple of things before you do this. You really want to consider repurposing or using an existing field only when the data is very similar to the existing attribute purpose. Maybe all you need to do is rename it. Another situation that would cause you to start repurposing existing fields would be that you're out of room in the entity to add any more new attributes. In this case, probably the row size of the custom attributes has exceeded 8060 byte and you need to add something else. So if you do, you can always repurpose existing entities which will not have an impact upon that size. The other thing, which is much less likely to happen, is that your custom attribute count for the entity is now at 1023 and you need to add one more. You'll find that there's a lot of unused data fields in the base system solution, and they can all be repurposed as long as you're certain that it will never be needed for its original purpose and it's not used in any enhanced function processing done by the system. So for instance, you'd want to be careful in repurposing fields in quotes, orders, invoices, cases, and the like. When in doubt as to whether or not you can use an existing attribute versus a new one, create the new one. So now let's go ahead and take a look at just customizing an existing field within the system. So I've navigated to the default solution and I'm in the fields list of the account entity. In this particular case, we don't call the account number for a particular client. So I'm going to go in and customize the existing account number field to change it to account ID and to make it recommended. So these are two of the things that I can typically choose to customize even after a field has been created. Also, I can choose whether or not to make it searchable or not, which means it will appear or not appear in advanced finds based upon what we do here. It also turns out that our account ID can be 25 characters long, so I have the ability to go ahead and extend the length of the field by putting in a maximum length of 25. And that's all there is to it. I just have to save and close. And the schema will be updated. Now, the other issue that we run into is that once I put this on a form, I will want to publish the customizations, but that will come in a later episode. So now that we have an opportunity to see how we modify a field, let's take a look at the different attribute data types supported by CRM 2011. Basically, it runs the full gamut of what we might need to create. We can create a single line of text, which translates into nvarchar under SQL, parentheses x, close parens. An option set. Option sets allow us to basically provide a pick list, and it's stored in the SQL database as an integer. Two options, which is basically a yes or no field, or a bit field. Whole numbers, which are stored as integers. Floating point numbers, stored as float. Decimal numbers, which are stored as decimal. Currency, which is stored as a money field. Multiple lines of text, which are stored as nvarchar parentheses max, close parentheses. This is for storing very large amounts of text, up to 100,000 characters. The date and time field, stored as date time. And finally, the lookup field type, which is basically stored in CRM as a unique identifier or a foreign key. It's important to note that the properties of attributes vary from attribute type to attribute type. As we can see here on the screen, we're looking at the types of attributes associated with a single line of text. However, if we look at an option set, you can see the screen differs greatly. As we go through the process, you'll see that each screen has some default pieces at the top that are in common, and some properties at the bottom that will change depending on the type of data that we're looking at. So let's talk for a moment about those attributes which are common amongst all the different data types. All attributes must have a display name, which is displayed on the forms and the views, and a schema name. The schema name is how it's identified within the database in SQL, as well as used when referring to it when you're writing code later. The requirement level, which allows us to specify whether or not this is a mandatory field, and so on. Is this field searchable? This determines whether or not we're going to be able to see it when we use advanced find. Do we want to turn on field security, auditing, and finally the description, which is basically just documentation and does not appear anywhere to the end user. The schema name, as I said earlier, the name is used in code and in the SQL database. Requirement level. This determines whether or not a field is mandatory or recommended and determines how the controls will work on the form. If it's required, the user must put a value into this field before it will be permitted to save the form. Business recommended, on the other hand, just puts a blue plus sign next to the field, but does not require any data entry. And then finally, no constraint, which is the default. Searchable determines if the field can be seen in advanced find, and basically it's a good idea to go through and set all unused fields in the database, especially those that came with the out-of-box entities, to reduce the end user's confusion when they're running advanced finds. Usually, this can make a big difference in end user productivity. Don't forget this step. Field security, if yes, enables individual field level security, which means that users will not be able to see the field unless they are specifically granted authority to see that field. Auditing, if yes, changes to any data in this field will be logged in the audit logs. So let's talk a moment about how we create new attributes in CRM 2011. We can go from within the entity itself, inside the default solution, and that's probably best when we're doing unique customizations for the site and that are not part of a custom solution that we're getting ready to export. Or we can go into the custom solution when we're trying to create something that we plan on exporting as a managed or unmanaged solution and want to group our customizations there. And then finally, from within the entity form or forms themselves. And this is fastest when you're enhancing an existing form on the fly and need to add a new data element to the form that does not exist in the database. On the other hand, be cautious with this because it's so easy. You may forget to do appropriate database design. Make sure you're thinking about the appropriate places to put the data before you do this. So next, let's have a demonstration of creating a new attribute from scratch. So now let's take a moment and show how easy it is to create a new attribute within CRM 2011. One of the fastest ways to add a new attribute to an existing structure is from within the form itself. So in this particular case, since I am signed on as the system administrator, the Customize tab appears at the top of the form. I can click on this form and then go straight into customizing the form. Now in this situation, I want to create a new field to show on the account form. Well, for that to work, that means that I have to have that field in the database specifically in the account entity. Since we want to create a new field, we know it's not already there. So one of the fastest ways to create a new field when I'm working on a form is to just slip down into New Field. This brings up the same web page dialog we use for creating a new field, no matter what area we create it from. So in this particular case, we're going to create a new text field that's going to be a single line of text. In this case, it's going to be an alternate web address. So now, if you'll notice, as I tab out of the field, it takes my display name and compresses it and puts it to the name. Next, I can choose whether or not I want it to be required or not, and since not all companies would have this, I'm going to make this field business recommended. I do want it to be searchable. I'm going to disable field security. I don't have any need to audit the field, so I'm turning that off. And I could also put a description in here for documentation purposes. To keep the demo simple, we'll avoid that. So we selected the default, a single line of text, and now what we want to do is make this a URL field, which enables it to be double-clicked and launch a browser going to that field. And if I save and close, the field has been created. So if I go down to alternate URL, which is right here, I can drag and drop that onto the form right here. And while we're not working with form customization at this point, I'm doing this to show you something about dependencies later. So that being said, I can save. And after I save, I publish. And voila, if we go out and go back to the account record that we were in, you'll notice it's not here right now because this is a web-based form. However, if we refresh the form with an F5, we now have our alternate web URL and it will be validated. So if I just try to put in something like website that doesn't have appropriate nomenclature, it'll take it. So when I key in the website, and tab forward, you'll notice it builds it into a full URL. And I can now double click that, and up pops my browser going to the website that's stored in there. That's how we create a quick field. There are other options which we'll detail later in the slide deck, but that should give you a good idea of one way to create a field quickly.